Martin, welcome to B2B Content Strategist Podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am as well. Looking forward to the conversation. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate every guest coming on the show, and I know we're going to have a great discussion. So to kick that off, in summary, could you share a little bit about your role and a few sentences about what your organization does as well?
Yeah. I currently lead content at wealth.com. So I oversee all of our content production and storytelling with a few different avenues of content and education, sales enablement, support, but obviously campaign when it comes to copy and lifecycle marketing and things like that. And yeah, at wealth.com, what we do is we're building a digital ecosystem for estate planning. So we enable financial advisors to offer their clients more holistic services by bringing in estate planning and really empowering their clients to have control over their estate plan, which is something that many people want, but about 2/3 of the people out there don't have any sort of estate plan. So we're really trying to empower people to have that. And then historically, it's something that you'd have to go to a lawyer to do. So, we have in-house legal counsel helping to build and maintain our platform, but by giving the financial advisor the tool to pass on to their clients as well to make that easier, to make it more holistic in terms of their financial planning. And so, yeah, a lot of our marketing and campaigning is targeted at those financial advisors to help them understand, the intricacies of estate planning and how to help their clients. But, we also create a lot of education for those end users, which are the advisors' clients. So, yeah, really interesting space in the wealth tech. And I think it's heating up lately. We just raised a Series A this week.
Oh, wow.
That. So that's super exciting from GV, Google Ventures as the lead investor. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting time, I think, right now in wealth tech and especially in estate planning.
Absolutely. How long has the organization been in business for? I know you've been there for about 9 or 10 months or so, haven't you? But how long has it been around?
Yeah, the company's been around for a few years, so it's still a younger company. Obviously Series A, early stage. But yeah, it's been around for a few years, but the company did really well. It's really exciting. We're still small, of course, but we've done big things with a small team.
Yeah, I love that. Small and nimble. So we're leading on to the next question. Perfect segue into that. So what does your team look like in the marketing area? I imagine from what you just said, not huge, but what does it look like?
We're a nimble marketing team. So yeah, I lead content. We have a CMO. We have a design team of 2 designers. And then we have a marketing generalist that oversees a lot of our lifecycle marketing and social events. So yeah, it's a pretty nimble team. Obviously with a recent funding, we're going to hire a couple more people. But yeah, it's as is typical of my experience in young startups, we all have our roles, but we also, the lines tend to blur and we do a lot of different things as well. And jump in,
Yeah, absolutely. Are there certain things that you have very much decided to keep in-house versus certain areas that you've decided to outsource for the time being? And obviously now that you've got the funding as well, are there some areas that you're particularly protective of? Like I always want to keep SEO with an SEO outsource specialist, but we'll always keep writing in-house or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's a good question. We actually don't outsource a ton right now. We have some design resources that we'll outsource, and we don't have a dedicated right now growth or demand gen person. So some of that is outsourced as well. Working with an agency. When it comes to content, I'm a big believer that some of that can be outsourced. So I like to outsource what I call some of the more educational stuff. So it's like pillar building or foundation building. Sort of educational evergreen content, I usually feel comfortable outsourcing that. But if it comes to, say, sales enablement or, I call it here advisor enablement, if it's that sort of like product focused copy, that's the stuff that I usually like to keep in house. It's just hard to translate that to an external person that's not here, and it sort of defeats the purpose, I think, of outsourcing. Usually the outsourcing is to make things quicker and to get more production. But yeah, that's what we do right now. Sometimes, I'm okay. Sometimes, outsourcing some campaign stuff, if it comes to building a campaign or, landing page copy, things like that, ad copy. We don't do that right now, but I'm okay doing that sometimes as well. Sometimes it's nice to get an outsider's perspective. So if we're working with an agency, sometimes it's nice to work with them and help craft that campaign idea. But yeah, right now we keep most things in house.
Yeah. I guess a term that I've been hearing a lot as I've been recording this third season of B2B content strategist is people talking about doing more with less and, kind of being encouraged to do more with less. And I guess some of the teams that were fairly big have started to shrink a little bit. And so they've got smaller and they're under pressure to do more with less. Whereas obviously you're going in the other direction of a fairly new company and you're growing, you've just got investment and things like that. So hopefully, you're not shrinking, but growing the team. But in terms of that mantra, do more with less, what does that mean to you in terms of how you work? And is there anything you do to kind of streamline processes and things like that to help kind of bring about doing more with less?
Yeah. I mean, I hear that a lot too. I think everyone's been saying that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's particular to just marketing or content. I think that's just a byproduct of, the hyper growth that tech had, for a few years. And I think that in a lot of ways, what was happening is things were just bloated. Valuations are still bloated for a lot of companies. Funding was bloated. But I think it's just sort of a scale back to reality in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't say that I necessarily personally feel like I'm working with less than I have in the past. Being an early company, we're just small. But, at the big companies I've been in, I wouldn't necessarily say that I had, all the resources I always wanted. I still had to, figure out ways to get around that. But I think when people are saying that, I think what that really means is I think that given, what's happening in tech and sort of the pullback the past 2 years, hopefully things are getting better now. But I think what that means is that, I think companies want to see the results faster because they want to prove if it's a company that's maybe later stage that has to grow back into a valuation they received in 2021. I think there's probably a lot of pressure to sort of grow fast. And so that team has to really prove themselves, with less resources than maybe they anticipated being a $1 billion valuation company. But I also think that when it comes to every team, especially go-to-market teams, I think marketing, I think sales, I think there's always been a lot of pressure on those teams to do a lot with few resources and to have really quick turnaround in terms of showing that growth. So I think it's just a nature of the teams and a nature of what we do for a living. But yeah, I think I've been hearing that a lot from people too. So I don't know if there's certain people in marketing that are used to having multiple agencies that they work with and outsourcing and large teams. I certainly know that there's companies that a few years ago that I knew that had 7, 8 just writers on the team. I've never had that luxury myself as a content team, as a content leader. But I know that, there was companies investing in that way. So, I think maybe when, people are saying doing more with less, there's probably marketing leaders that are feeling that pressure of, I can't just go out and hire. And I think it's more about right now. I think it's like strategically hiring, that's what we do at our company. I think it's really smart. My hiring philosophy has always been sort of feel the pain before you hire, rather than sort of, have the need, like have the want. I think there's a lot of people that are like, I want to do this better. I want to do this faster. I just want to do this. We have a gap there. Let's go out and hire. And so I think maybe that's happening less. I think maybe, when the money was flowing freely in the pandemic and pre-pandemic, that was easier to do. So maybe now I think what might be happening is they have to prove that there's that gap. They have to prove what's the ROI of hiring this person or bringing in that agency. So I think that's what's happening. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for things to come down, working in tech for years, It was pretty crazy there for a few years. It was fun to have lived through there, though.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with you on all of that. So could you share some insight into the most memorable marketing campaign that you have run? So it doesn't necessarily have to be from the current role that you're in at the moment, just stretching back through your career, really. And I notice I say memorable, so not necessarily the most successful, the most memorable campaign that you've run and like how you were measuring success and, what did the campaign look like? What were the metrics and results?
I think something that comes to mind, there's actually a few, but I'll go to one. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily actually like a defined campaign, but something I just see as a success in my career, and something that I did through content and through go-to-market efforts is at my last company. My last company was called SecFi. It's a great company, and really, what the main product of the company actually was a financing company. So really, what we did is we worked with startup employees, all the way, regular, individual contributors up to founders, really, and helped finance the exercise of their stock options, or helped provide financing for stock options they already own, sort of not actually technically a loan, but helping them to buy those stock options, while the company was still private, to realize, value on those later. I actually did it, as I was actually a client of theirs before I started working there, because one of my previous companies, a firm, ended up IPOing. And so really, a lot of what the company did, besides that, was a lot of education on how stock options work. The company actually now has an RIA. They launched SecFi Wealth. They have great financial advisors. It's a fantastic team over there, working with startup employees to help them understand, the full finances, but really with an eye towards, where's the equity fit into this? It's confusing. People work in startups and have no idea how equity works. But really, when I joined, I see the success as really, I call it educating the market. So I worked really closely with the PR team that we hired. I go through it for our executives, and we put a lot of content out there. In terms of educating about the problem, I think when I joined, having worked in startups, I also had not a whole lot of idea about equity. When you work in companies, they don't really talk to you about it. There's reasons for that. There's legalities. They don't want to be seen as giving financial advice. That all makes sense. But there's really no there's not a lot out there in terms of how does this work? What should I do? A lot of people don't know you have to buy a stock option. You have to exercise your option. You have to pay taxes most likely when you exercise, even though it's unrealized gains. So people don't realize they might be hit with a huge tax bill just by buying those options, right? And they can't go out and sell them. Maybe they can, maybe they can sell them on the secondary market. Maybe their company will have a tender offer, but usually you have to go ahead and do that. And so really, I think there's this perception that, oh, you have stock options, you're at Uber or whatever, you just went public, you're rich. And I think when I joined, I used to say a lot, I don't want to be the wet blanket, but I don't think that's not necessarily true, right? There's a lot of people that may have left a company like Uber or left a company like Airbnb early and didn't exercise their options because they couldn't afford it, didn't understand it, didn't know, it's very common that if you leave a company that they expire after often 90 days. People don't know that, right? They get a new job. They don't realize 90 days to figure this out. So a lot of what I did was really just educating the market on that problem. Yes, it's a good thing when a company exits, when they have when they're acquired, when they go public, but there's a lot of people that are kind of left out of that either get nothing, or they don't get as much as they could have, or they're just not making the smartest moves because they don't understand how it works. So a lot of what we did was really, that's what I was calling it, educating the market, even educating reporters on how this worked. I think around the time when I joined, I remember there was this big New York Times article about, I think it was around the time when Uber and a few more of those companies were about to go public. There was this big article, everyone in San Francisco is going to be so rich, the real estate's going to get crazy, there's going to be millionaires walking around. And it turned out that wasn't true. And there was a follow-up article a few months later after the exits happened, and sort of what happened. And the reality was that people did get money. They just didn't get necessarily, as much money as people imagine they get. And people put them towards practical things like paying for school for their children, or paying off student loans, or buying a car. So a lot of what I wanted to do was help to tell that story. That's not a bad thing to do with the money that you get from exit, but let's be realistic about how equity works. A lot of startups, they tell you that they give you equity. The whole point is, let's help people understand what that really means, how to make a decision about what to do with it, and just set that problem statement that this is a problem in the startup industry. It's a good problem to have. Hey, you have equity. Maybe your company is doing well. Maybe it's on the path to an exit of some sort, but it's still a decision that this person has to make. And, it's a financial decision. People don't like making financial decisions, and a lot of people just don't have the tools to make the right financial decisions. So, in my first year, especially they did a really good job, I think, of setting that narrative, telling that story, even telling, there's founders that don't understand equity. Their first time founder, they've never really been through this. They don't know how equity, they just want to build a company. Equity is a byproduct. So that was a really great campaign, and just setting that and to set up the company obviously as like, thought leaders on that, on equity. But really just setting that stage, and really just helping to like control that narrative, and really just telling that problem statement, which is like what we were solving. So that was great. And I think another like, probably like more contained campaign that we really liked was when I was at a firm, which is a public company now. Early on, we did this campaign around basically like credit card fees. So obviously, if people don't know what a firm is, it's a pay over time payment option. It's upfront. It's transparent. Lets you pick like what 3, 6, 12 months. It shows you the interest you'll pay over that time. It's very transparent. There's no late fees. There's no, as far as I'm aware, still no late fees. No compounding interest. So we did a campaign about essentially like compounding interest. Essentially about when it came to other options, like say a store credit card, those interest rates are super high. And we did research that a lot of those store credit cards, for instance, like most of their money that they're making is through interest fees. It's not through, the loans they're giving. It's through the fact that people are carrying balances. It's the fact that it's really hard to understand how compound interest works. I remember going to a certain credit card's website to find out, how do they talk about compound interest? That basically gave you this really intricate, math equation. Here's how you can figure it out. And it's like, okay, so I have to figure it out myself with this, math equation. And so really, we just did a really good job about talking about the problem of compound interest. And not just that, but about how, some of these companies actually want you to carry interest and they make it opaque on purpose. Because if you go out and buy $1,000 computer, they want you to, go, I'll pay that over, 6 months of my credit card. You don't really understand that doing so will actually cost you X amount of dollars more. And that's where people fall into traps, right? And that's how they balloon into credit card debt. So early on, we're really telling the story of, why is it so important that we are being honest and transparent about this? And this is why, because we believe that people should understand how this works. We're charging interest on a lot of these, but we're showing you upfront exactly what that's going to look like and what you're going to owe.
And when you're creating, let's say, for example, with that campaign, when you're creating that informative, educational, trust building, like authoritative content, what's your kind of favorite, I guess, go-to format for the content? Are we talking about like reports, articles, white papers, or videos, webinars, podcasts? Like, what's the key formats that you really like to lean into?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of campaigns. Certainly at that campaign with the firm, there was some white papers, there was some articles. I remember we even during like a product announcement, I put together an entire press kit for journalists, and there was like a 1-pager in there about compound interest, essentially explaining to them how it works. And the goal was to show that it's like complicated, right? It's not easy to figure out, and that's sort of the problem, is that an everyday person doesn't understand how this works. But yeah, for that it was a lot of research, a lot of white papers. We we did some ABM at a firm as well, sort of putting that together. We created like a few pieces of content. We created like a specific landing page where all that content was housed. Doing life cycle marketing in terms of dripping out that campaign. And that SecFi campaign was really, I'd say, the educating the market. A lot of that, there's a lot of content that I was building on the website, still there, evergreen content, but a lot of that too was being done actually through like thought leadership and press, in a lot of ways. So like I said, ghostwriting, and helping my executives do that stuff. Putting that out, through TechCrunch and, like places like that where startup employees are going. But we also did like a state of stock options report every year. A research report that I worked with my team, that we worked internally with some of our analysts. Like we would look at exits every year. We would look at S1s that were filed, and we do some of our own, takeaways from that to understand like what's happening in the state of stock options. This company IPO and how many people actually exercised before the IPO, things like that. What's the how much did the value increase? What were people underwater potentially? A month after the IPO, were they up? Just doing a whole state, like what's really interesting and that's happening this year. And so yeah, a lot of that was to use that data to show like here's the trends that's happening right now. Here's where people stand with this stuff. But yeah, a lot of that Secfi too was more thought leadership. And certainly like the campaign at Firm was like, I feel like a traditional like B2B type of campaign talking to merchants and e-commerce companies in terms of like why you should provide your employees another option that's more like transparent in terms of financing.
Absolutely. And in terms of repurposing, so you're probably not surprised that I love to talk about content repurposing and distributing, maximizing content. First question, just leading on from that. So on this topic, would you say that you repurpose content, like maximize and really like squeeze all the juice out of the content that you create as much as you would like? Like, is it something that you feel that you do enough of, or is there more to do in the world of like maximizing and repurposing the content that you're creating, I guess, at the moment in the current role that you have?
Yeah, I think I feel like I can always probably get more juice out of things. I feel like there's always a little bit of wanting to sort of move on to the next thing. But I also think we do repurpose really well. And I think, in terms of, I think you put out a really good piece of content that should become a few social posts, that should become a webinar, you can and then vice versa, and reusing that. And I think at the same time, sometimes like, right, you put out a piece of content that's like, okay, let's move on to the next thing. Sometimes, I think sometimes at certain companies and probably internal pressure to do that. Maybe it's from like, a demand gen team, like, hey, that piece of content's already out there. Like we need the next piece. And I've worked with teams like that to help, build a bridge in terms of like, here's how this piece of content can last for a long time. And here's how, it can be repurposed. Here's how it can be pulled apart. And I've actually worked with like lead gen teams to actually do that and show them, here's an ebook we put out, like, here's how your team can repurpose this as much as possible in your own lead gen campaigns. At the same time, I feel like what I tell people a lot about what I do is in some ways, even though it feels like I don't always get the juice out of everything as much as I want, I do think a lot of my job at every company I've been at is like kind of telling the same story over and over in different ways. I think like every company really has kind of one main story that they're telling, right? That doesn't mean that there's not sub chapters below that and ways to tell that, but I think really every company sort of has like one singular story, and so it's my job to like find ways to retell that story in different and interesting ways. And I think a lot of it too that works in the market is you don't want to always just move on to the next thing. I think like you need to create that sort of like, people don't move as quick as you do. Like you need to create that comprehension in the market and that like consistency. And so that's what I talk about a lot too, like internally at companies. And I've worked at bigger companies where the marketing teams are huge, and there's a huge brand team, there's a huge demand gen team, there's a huge events team and SDR team. A lot of times when I come in is I talk a lot about consistency, like we don't have to move on to the next thing as quickly. Like people need to sometimes like they need dozens of touch points. So you put out a piece of content and then they see an ad on LinkedIn and then they see a webinar, like it should all be saying the same thing because they need to sort of let it sink in. Like, what is it that we're talking about? What is it that our product does? What are we solving? If you're moving from here to here to here to here, people are going to be really confused. Like, wait, what does this company do? Who's their target audience? Am I the right audience for their product? Are they going to be confused? Unless they're, actively looking for it. If they're just sort of, top of or mid of funnel, they like kind of need that consistency to sort of, my goal is by the time someone gets on a call with an SDR or salesperson, like they already know what we do and what we solve. They're not asking those questions. And I think if you're not consistent with your content and your campaigns, like people are going to be like, so wait, what do you do again? Like, tell me what you do. Like, you don't want to waste time on that. I think, it's easier said than done, obviously, but yeah, I think consistency is key, and it can sound like a boring thing to do. Like, yeah, just tell the same story over and over. But I think that's the fun part, is finding new and different ways to do that and
Exactly.
be consistent.
And be consistent. Yeah, exactly. Consistency is key. You've mentioned loads of different content types when you were talking there, and like white papers and webinars. I know you've got a podcast as well, and report. You mentioned loads. And when it comes to having like a big core pillar piece and then being able to squeeze the value, is there a favorite content type that you like to go to, like a content format? That you then wrap a really big repurposing plan around. It's like a favorite type of content to repurpose.
Yeah, I feel like it's maybe traditional, but I still feel like I fall back sometimes on like the ebook. And that has different definitions. Like, ebook doesn't mean like a 50-page thing. It could be 5 pages. But I think that's just always for me the simplest thing to start with, writing. I consume personally mostly in written words still. Like I read the news, I read things, so I'm actually in my personal life like a bit of a film buff and things like that. So I am like a visual person, but I don't tend to watch a lot of videos. I don't tend to always listen to actually a ton of podcasts all the time. I usually it's mostly comes down to time, but I tend to read, and I think that's why. It's because I don't always have the time to sit there for an hour, so I tend to read something, put it down, pick it up later. It's just the life of having a family and everything. But so that's just me. I prefer the written word. But yeah, I think for me it's sometimes easiest to start with sort of that kind of thing, like as a pillar content. An ebook at one of my previous companies, we called it the bricks and feathers strategy, where you create a brick. Usually for us is like some sort of ebook, and then you create feathers around it that fall back to the brick.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think if you start with like an ebook in that way, and I think like you don't need a ton of those. Like every company just needs a few pillar pieces of content in that way that remain static, that remain evergreen. But yeah, it's really easy. You pull out a chapter of that, and that becomes a blog post. You pull out a chapter that becomes a webinar. You create a webinar series. You create social posts over 3 months about it. But I think now, with podcasting, which is really great, is like you can start with a podcast and turn that into a piece of pillar content, or turn that into a series of blog posts. So I think that's changing as well now that I think podcasting, a lot of companies have those now. I think it's and it's a good way to get experts on and get outside opinions and get third parties on there. So it's a really great way too to like almost get research done through a podcast. So I really enjoy those as well. That they're much more casual sometimes, but they give you a lot to work with later to create written content. So yeah, and I think like for a few years I was not doing a ton of webinars. For instance, I think maybe during the pandemic, maybe like everyone, I feel like everyone's probably like virtual evented out, like, but I think they're coming back. I see more companies doing them. We're doing more of them. At the end of my time last year with SecFi, we were even doing more of them. And we're actually mostly a B2C company, and they were working. People were joining, people were engaged. So I saw that turnaround too. And yeah, a webinar can obviously become content as well, vice versa. But for me, yeah, I'm a writer. I still read, I do all of that. So for me, it usually starts with a piece of writing.
It's funny you should say about like podcasts and then webinar. And of course, we're talking about like ebooks as well, because there's some clients of ours that we work with where we're repurposing the webinar into a podcast episode, and then that's sitting at the top of that content mountain and creating all the content from that. But then we're taking a load of like themed webinars and turning them up into the long big ebook as well. So it's funny you should mention with the ebook, because and then you mentioned webinar and podcast, because there's like they all can sort of play into each other as well, which work really well. So no, it's good. And in terms of content management tools, so just if there are any in particular that you are loving at the moment, anything that's helping with content management workflows, processes, is there anything that's really, just really working for you from like a tool perspective?
To be honest, I don't use a ton of tools right now.
No.
A lot of it's managed, just in Google Sheets, for calendaring, Google Docs for writing. I think like everyone, sometimes, an AI tool like ChatGPT, is there more than it used to be. But yeah, in the past, I have used certain tools, that I've really liked. I've used different management tools like Airtable,
Yeah.
uh, Monday. I think I've used a few more as well. They're helpful. It kind of depends on who's using them internally. I've been at some companies where one team uses Airtable, one team uses Monday.
Yeah.
So that's not always super helpful.
No.
We Back in the day, way back in the day, early in my career, I actually loved Trello.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
that was my favorite, honestly, because it was so simple. And I've seen it. I don't know. Probably everyone has seen this, but when you can have a great calendar and a great project management tool that's only as good as you use it. And sometimes people just, it's a lot of effort just to jump in there and use it. So I've been at some larger companies where sometimes like a lot of my effort was just going into the project management part of it. Just updating things, adding comments, rather than focusing on the work. But yeah, I've used other tools in the past too. I'm trying to remember, that have been really great. But yeah, I think a tool is like really just as good as like you leverage it, right? You can have the best tool in the world, but if you don't use it or other people aren't using it, then it's not helpful. So that's sort of my opinion on tools. Like, yeah.
Well, actually, I guess it's kind of a good lead into my next question. So, you briefly mentioned it when you said about AI tools and ChatGPT. So in terms of AI within, the team at the moment and the content creation process, what are your views on that? Are there any ways you've been experimenting with its usage? Is there a particular use case that's been great, or maybe a cautionary tale where it didn't work out so well?
Yeah, I think AI tools for content probably most people are using ChatGPT, is my guess. I know there's others out there, some really good companies. But I think with a tool like that, I think it's good and bad. I think it's good. I think it could be really helpful that it's there. I think it can, we're talking about doing more with less. I think it is like a good assistant, right? It can help you, like, here's some of my notes. Can you organize this into an outline? I think, can you edit, or can you just proofread my piece, right? It's like someone there that can, you don't have to ask someone else on your team. Hey, can you proofread this? I've been working on this all day. You can send it to that. I think the bad is that it could easily become a crutch, in terms of relying on it too much. Um, I think that, like, I have asked it for sometimes, hey, can you provide me an outline with this? And I just don't like the outline. And then you all of a sudden find yourself lost in an hour just trying to get what you want out of it, when
Yes.
you really could
Yeah.
have just spent that
You
hour
could have
just like
done it.
building the outline yourself. And so, like, right, like, I think there's probably a lot more content out there, like, ironically now, about how to train AI, how to get what you want out of it. I've seen those pieces of the content, which is really great. Because again, it is a tool, and like any tool, it's only as good as you use it. It's only as good as the prompts. But I think it can become a crutch, and I think that, and the reason I don't super worry about it, although my worry is, like, a long, everyone's going to kind of become into the middle, especially small companies. They're going to rely on AI to be quick, and to leverage it to, create things fast when they don't have a large team. I think the worry I have is that a lot of content then online could just become very samey. Um, that's what I worry about. But the reason I don't worry about that is because I think that because of that, the companies that are going to do well are the ones that have, an original brand voice, that have their own tone, that cut through all of that. So I think that's like the upside for people working in marketing, is I know a lot of people in marketing get worried about the automation, about the AI. As a writer, like, well, could I be outsourced to an AI tool? I don't think so. I think that like anything, at first, people might really lean really heavily into doing that. But I think over time, what they're going to see is the results are not there. And they're going to wonder why the results aren't out there. I use ChatGPT to create 50 articles this month and we're not getting any more traffic. Well, because the articles aren't very good. Um, they may be factually correct. They may be, there might not be anything quote unquote wrong with them, but they're not going to have that personality. And I think that, Google's getting smarter. It's going to pick up on that. Google's going to know what is AI generated and what's not. It's going to want to leverage, in order to show you the human generated content over the AI. So I think there are guardrails, but yeah, I think it could be really helpful as like an assistant, for sure. It can be there to bounce ideas off of, if you get stuck on something like, like working on ad copy. I think that really has helped me sometimes. Like, I might write out like 10 to 20 pieces of ad copy and be like, I don't know, none of these are quite right. And I'll send it to ChatGPT and say like, hey, can you spit out some other ideas? I will never take any of those ideas verbatim, but it might help me think about, different word choices or flipping, the way that the sentence is structured, and just help me like get outside of my own little bubble that I've been in for the last few hours. So I think that can be really helpful. And I think there are tools out there like a tool like Writer where you can like ingest your editorial style guide, and it can actually help like across the company people stick to that brand guide. So I think tools like that could be really helpful, especially for larger companies, where like the content team or the content person can't create all the content. I think that people like almost all people at every company are creating content. So it's hard for like the content person, the content team to always do that. So I think there are like good AI tools that can help the rest of the company sort of like stick to the style guide that you've created. But yeah, so I think it could be helpful, but I think it's also very easily can turn into a crutch.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're relying on it a little bit too much. You're like not getting what you want. And or you start to not understand what's good and what's not. You're like, oh, that sounds fine. Right, good enough.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's kind of like such a big thing with so many different angles to it that it really does just depend on what are you using it for and how are you using it, doesn't it? Really, like if an accountant's using Excel and that became you, what are they using it for and how are they using it? Like it's massive, isn't it? Some really advanced ways, and some people probably look that would have been easier to just do it the old way. So I completely agree with you, and like you said, I'm the same. I don't find I ever take exactly what it provides me with, but it'll give me a different view. Oh, that word is interesting. Actually, I think I had it, but that word makes it better. And we're all figuring it out, aren't we? So, I love that question. So we're at the point of the episode where we share with you a question that the previous guest on the show asked. So they were basically told that they were in a room full of senior content marketers and they could ask a question and get an answer. What would it be? So the question comes from Luba Chersky, who was the director of content at Picton Mahoney Asset Management. So her question to you is,
when you're thinking about content and you're marketing to people, how much or how little do you want to follow the general public discourse of what are the hot topics and trends right now? How much do you want to be newsy and on trend versus how much do you want to be just consistently giving the same type of advice and counsel?
My answer would be both. So I think a really good example would be at my last company, SecFi. So a lot of time spent with my team, we built really foundational, evergreen educational content on how stock options work. We created guides about ISOs and NSOs and taxation and exits and really just evergreen. Some of it could change in terms of tax law changed or regulations and things like that. We might need to update it, but really a lot of that was just super evergreen. How does it work? What's the standard operating procedure if you exercise an ISO? Like, what does that look like? How do you figure out what taxes you might owe? What happens when your company IPOs? Like, what's the typical, you have a 6-month window usually before you can sell. When you can sell, how do you calculate the taxes? So we built a lot of like evergreen content. But I also think to engage people, especially when you're a young company and you're trying to build your brand. Like, I do think you want to stay on trend. I do think you want to stay relevant. And I mentioned doing that with educating the market at that company, where we really had to educate, like, even journalists and reporters, like, on the problem statement and get them to really understand it. My team, we wrote a really great article about Elon Musk's stock option problem at the time. He had mentioned on the podcast. Yeah, he had mentioned on a podcast that his Tesla, I think it was Tesla, where options were about to expire. And if he were to exercise it, it was some ridiculous amount of money, right? Like, millions, maybe hundreds of millions, if I recall. I can't remember the exact amount. But we wrote an article about, like, this is the problem we're solving. Most people want to own hundreds of millions, but this is the problem, is that all of a sudden they get themselves into a case where their stock options are expiring, or they're, they left their job and they're like, oh, I have a timetable. So, that really resonated with people in terms of, like, we used a very public figure who had the same problem that a lot of people in the startup community, just magnified times 100. We also did a SecFi that was really successful, and they're still doing, as a newsletter. So we sent out usually a bi-weekly newsletter, and that was touching on recent topics. So for instance, like, one of the most popular ones we sent out was about the Silicon Valley Bank crash. So when that bank went under, a lot of people are obviously worried. It affected, actually payroll for a number of companies, if I recall, because a lot of companies were relying on the bank. And so it was a big deal. And also, obviously, at the time, the economy wasn't doing so great. This is like, inflation was really high. So a lot of people were really nervous. IPOs had come to a stop. Everyone in tech was already a little bit worried. And all of a sudden, like, the bank of tech crashed. And so people worry not only about those things, but also it's just the beginning of, like a 2008 all over again. And so we actually put out a newsletter, I think within a day or so, about that, where I worked with our head of investments on the RIA side of the business, where we talked about, like, what happened. Like, a lot of people just didn't know, like, how did it crash? How did this bank all of a sudden just go under in a week? So we explained, what happened. Obviously we didn't know the future, but, like, what could this mean? But also, some things about, like, why this may not be as big of a worry as it needs to be. And talking about things like that and giving historical context. It was a run on the bank. So we get historical context on, what happened in the old Wild West of early banking. There's a lot of run on banks, and this is what it means. And this is, there's guardrails today. And this is why those regulations, this is why your money is insured in banks, and giving some of that context to take away a little bit of that worry. We got a lot of feedback from people saying, like, thank you. Like, I didn't understand what was going on. I was reading the news. It was just really hard to understand. And we really just broke it down. And so I think those two sides of things really helped, particularly to that business, especially because, since we were working with startup people, they wanted the news on what's happening in VC, what's happening in funding, what's happening in IPOs. But we also want to provide that evergreen educational content. So I think depending on your business and depending on your audience, I think both. I think the newsy stuff is what catches people, but I think the educational evergreen stuff is what creates, like, fans and keeps people coming back.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's that kind of really, like, sort of topical content is going to catch you. It's engaging, it's interesting, it helps put into context a bit more sometimes to people what you're talking about, doesn't it? And then when people are consuming that, if they want to go a bit deeper and things like that, you've already got the additional informative, more evergreen pieces that it can link to and things like that. It can all play into each other anyway, can't it? So yeah, I think that's a great answer. It is a balance. Like, you do need to try and get a balance. And so no, that's a really good answer.
Yeah, you need to have you need to have the roots. So, like, in terms of that Elon Musk story, that story actually did really well on the outlet that it got published on. It was really well read. We got a huge spike. I think the biggest spike we ever got in web traffic to our website. So basically, we were able to set up the problem statement, because it's Elon Musk and people love reading about him, and saying, this is the problem. He has it. If he has it, and, like, he can't figure it out, or I think he did figure it out, but if he ran into this problem, anyone can. But if they're coming to our website, then who are you? What do you do? we need to make sure we're providing the answer to that problem that we set up. And that's the evergreen educational content. Like, I don't understand how my stock options work. Like, he doesn't either. Like, that's crazy. How do I figure it out? And then so they come to our site to see what we do and who we are. And then we should have that content to educate them. Okay, now you're aware of the problem. We need to give you the answer.
Exactly. Thank God that you were already creating lots of content and embracing content marketing. So when you saw the opportunity to jump on that story, you already had all the content ready, and it was just there to kind of get the attention, and then everything kind of then played its role as it should. So it's really good.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the final question to you, which is to ask you to ask a question. So same question back to you. You don't know who the next guest is, but they're going to be similar, head of, director of, senior level, content marketing professional. What question would you ask your peers, a room full of peers? What would be a really useful question?
Yeah, I think a question I would love to ask my peers is, what would you consider the most overrated aspect of content marketing? Whether that's coming from you personally, like your personal opinion, or whether that's external, what you've maybe heard from colleagues in other departments. What do you think is maybe something that you hear all the time that you should be doing or shouldn't be doing that you just wish you could
That's an excellent
not listen to anymore?
Excellent question. Yeah. And I really look forward to the answer to that. So thank you. That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for coming on B2B Content Strategist. It's been such a great conversation. I know I've taken lots from it, and I know everybody tuning in will have really, taken lots of insights, really interesting. And, thanks for being so giving of like sharing information and tips and advice and things like that. So thank you so much. Is there anywhere that you would like people to go to connect with you, let you know that they listen to the show or anything like that? Any next step at all?
Yeah. Well, come to wealth.com, check us out, check out our content. If you have any feedback, reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Connect with me. I love connecting with other content people. If you want to have a conversation, that'd be great.
So if you listen to this now, just have a look in our show notes and you will see links to all of that. So click those links and head over now whilst you don't forget. So thank you so much again, Martin. Really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. This is a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.